City Matters.
This is Jonny Daniels back on HMTV with the incredible Mireille Taub. And this is the second part of what really is, especially for me, a fascinating conversation. And, you know, I think one of the factors, one of the points that we were kind of getting into a little bit was on this issue actually of parenting, right?
I'm sorry.
Was on the issue of parenting. And on one hand, what it meant for you growing up in that time period and growing up with parents who had a lot of bad news around them. How do you view children today to children from the past? Do you see a difference in the toughness of kids?
I think that our American children are frequently coddled and protected. They're given every advantage that their economic station allows them to have, but they're not always given the moral support and courage that they will need as an adult. And I find that somewhat troubling. I do find that there's a difference in populations. Because of the diverse population in the community in which I taught, some of our more recent immigrants to the United States didn't quite have the same point of view. So when I talk about my story or my husband's story and the issues that we had to face at various times, they get it. They absolutely get it. They don't whine about not being allowed to go ice skating or their increase in allowance or whatever. They do get it.
That's so interesting. You know, I see that personally as well. In the situation I have, my two daughters live in Israel, right? So growing up in a pretty tough neighborhood and definitely not the easiest of environments. And I see friends' kids growing up here in the United States, and there's such a massive difference even within kids on the same age group. So is there too much coddling going on, perhaps?
I think it's natural for parents to want to protect their children, but I think one of the hardest things for a parent to do is to say and to show them that life isn't always a bed of roses, and it can be done gently and kindly. But it's very important for children to learn that. I have 3 children. 2 of my children lived in France with us, and they were very much aware of my husband's background and mine, and they were very much aware of France, even though they were children at the time, and this is post-war. My youngest child, I call my American child because he looks like an American football player, and he had totally different perception of life. Fortunately, he grew up, and he grew up in my family, so we made sure he did understand some critical elements. But there is a difference.
You know, and that really is fascinating. You know, I see this a lot with the work that I do. In addition to my work in Holocaust education, I do a lot of work with Israel advocacy. And, you know, I'm struggling a lot right now, and especially today. I'm speaking this evening in New York City. A couple of 100 people are coming. Last minute event, a gathering where, you know, I'm supposed to give kind of, I suppose, a level of hope in what may feel like hopeless days.
Yes.
How would you go about something like that?
With great difficulty. I'm sorry to be a little bit callous in that sense,
No,
but
I
it's
appreciate
glib.
that.
I think you have to show them who you are. You speak from the heart. I'm quite sure that will be recognized, and I'm quite sure that you will be able to reach out to them effectively. You will find the right words by looking at yourself and them.
Right.
It's like when you go into a house of mourning and you yourself are mourning the person that was lost, and yet most of the time the words come up that will create solace and comfort, and you are well capable of that.
Right. That's interesting. It's because these are difficult days, and it's a big struggle for all of us.
Yes, it is.
And, you know, and again, often, one of the signs of hope is looking at people like yourself and other survivors and seeing how growing up and coming through such difficulty, you are still able to continue and build and create the most remarkable lives. And that, I think, is also so important to share.
I think that's why I do what I do. And I'm very proud of what I do. I have 3 grandchildren, and conveying to them the kind of lives my husband and I had was a significant part of my job as a grandparent. 2 of my grandchildren are biracial, so that they've had a particularly interesting journey in asserting who they are, and I'm very proud of all of them.
What's the most important message that you teach your grandkids?
Be proud of who you are, share what you can, share who you are, and continue to stand up. Now, both of my younger grandchildren, Sydney and Dylan, Sydney's my granddaughter, Dylan's my grandson, were docents here at the museum and talked about the children's experience. Sam lived in the city, so that was not possible. But you remember there's a world out there. You're not in it all by yourself. So continue to share the stories.
And if we don't tell our story, there's no one who's going to be telling it for us, right?
Absolutely. One of the things that I do if we don't tell our story, I'm a writer. So I have written several narratives dealing with personal family experiences. I'm trying to figure out what to do with the rest of the archives that I have that Uncle Leon managed to bring over or that my mother saved. I have a ton of papers, letters, and written in several different languages that were written to us between 1940 and 41 from families still in Europe.
Wow.
And I've translated the French. I haven't yet dealt with the Polish or the Yiddish, but I'm trying to figure out how to put this all together in one collection as part of our personal experience and hope to share that. So that's one of my many projects.
What are the projects that you've written? What have you?
Well, it depends. I belong to 2 writing groups, and one of the writing groups, we only write about personal narratives, so it depends on the prompt. The other writing group, most of the people in that group write about themselves because it's what you know best. I tend to take myths and fairy tales and fables and put them in a modern context.
How interesting.
So it depends.
What's your favorite story?
Oh, I can't tell you that. It's not because I won't tell you.
Right.
I so many.
And what about a favorite book?
So many. I learned to read at a very early age, and I was a lit major. I was an art major at one point.
Oh, wow.
And didn't know what to do with it, so I ended up being a lit major and taught literacy, fell backwards into teaching. I think that one of the books that made the biggest impact on me was a series of books written by Upton Sinclair. And it's the Lanny Budd series. And I love mysteries, and I love adventures. And if they're set in a foreign country, I love it that much better. So the Lanny Budd series is a kind of James Bond figure. He's a dilettante, very wealthy American art specialist. But he travels all over post-World War I Europe there were about 9 books in the series, into post-war World War II, into the Cold War. And he's a spy, and he rescues people. But the insights, because of who Upton Sinclair was, into that time period are absolutely remarkable. They're a major part in forming much of my thinking.
How interesting. I think we all have those authors that grab us. For me, it was Isaac Bashevis Singer.
Okay. I read him when I was a child in high school.
Yeah, I mean, his style of writing is so...
Oh, it's very lush, very, very lush. I'm not sure what my writing style is. It depends on what I'm writing, whether I emulate Hemingway, who is not a very nice person, but a very good writer, or somebody like Isaac Bashevis Singer, who has so many descriptives.
So many descriptors. It's just like...
So it all depends on what I'm writing.
Definitely takes you everywhere. So, I mean, and obviously you've placed a serious part of your life in terms of education and educating others. And your children presumably all went to college and finished with, I presume, multiple degrees.
Well, Elizabeth went to Brandeis.
Mm-hmm.
She is now the HR director for the law firm. Peter went to Carnegie Mellon. He wanted to be an architect. Loved Pittsburgh, loved Carnegie Mellon, did not want to be an architect. Mm-hmm. So he came back to New York and went to Parsons for a year and then said, I don't need to go to college to do what I do professionally. He's in fashion. I said, the rent check stops on September 1st if you're not enrolled in school. Here are your choices. You can come home to Long Island, many schools, or you can go to City College around the corner, which he did. I wasn't paying his rent. I just thought it was the right thing to say. Yeah. And so he finished with a degree in English, and he graduated magna cum laude, and he never did use anything. Bill went away to school. He was my reluctant scholar, brilliant, but not particularly settled. So he came back after 4 years and eventually finished. He went to Old Westbury, taught. He finished his degree the year that my husband died. Also, was it summa cum laude, I believe? It just took him a long, long time. He is an expert in cybersecurity. He advises the government, and he works for the largest media company in the world.
Wow.
He did the cybersecurity for the Olympics.
Goodness.
So, yes, it took him a while.
Yeah, well, that reluctance turned out to be okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Very proud of them.
Well, your parents, looking down, incredibly proud.
Smiling. Absolutely
Big smiles.
smiling.
Big smiles. Now, when we had a break, you showed me a picture of your mother. What is that? What document
This is her
that here?
French identity paper.
Uh-huh.
And this is my mom.
Wow.
She was very beautiful.
Very beautiful. Quite the elegant lady.
Always
well dressed.
She was my dad's arm candy. Dad was in the fashion business, and when he became ill at 40, he had his first heart attack at 40.
What did he do in the fashion business?
He manufactured luxury handbags.
So high-end schmatters.
Very, very high-end, yes.
Yeah.
There are books, he's been written up in books, etc. Wow. A leader in his field. Small factory, but...
What was it called?
Manon, after one of the many operas he loved.
Manon was the name.
Manon.
Do you have one of his handbags still?
I'm not wearing it yet. I have the Museum of Manon handbag on the top shelf of my closet.
Wow.
And one day, Peter keeps saying we're going to do an exhibit, but
absolutely.
I do. They're still very trendy, and I still see them around. And
you still see them around, and like vintage places
absolutely.
And stuff? How many did he produce? I mean,
I don't know. I really don't know.
Wow.
But he coordinated his handbags with luxury shoes, really very high end. And if the shoe model didn't show up, he would say, Mimi, come into the city. I need your feet, because I wore sample size. So my fascination with shoes is longstanding.
Now I
Right.
get those beautiful little
Right.
patent shoes from before.
Right.
Wow. Okay. So that was your father's industry.
Right.
So.
And Mom went in to supervise him. And so she needed to be extremely presentable. As I said, Daddy's arm candy.
That is our arm candy. Wow, how fascinating. And your husband ended up in the same industry, or?
Actually, yes and no.
Okay.
His father and his older brother at one time had a small manufacturing company in Paris manufacturing handbags. David wanted to become a cinematographer. So he worked with his father and his brother for a while, but he really wanted to become a cinematographer. And when he finished his French baccalaureate, the school that he wanted to enter closed for lack of funds. So he went to law school for a year and decided there were no widows and orphans that he could defend.
Right.
And he became an engineer. Wow. When he came to the United States, he was a sound engineer for Philips in France, and he did the sound engineering for the American Cathedral, for a number of major places, theaters, etc. In America, he was an engineer for a small company that did space work, capacitors and semiconductors and all the stuff I know nothing about and do not understand. And for a while, he worked for the company that made... for Wilson Greatbatch, who invented the battery for the pacemaker and implantable devices. So very high-tech stuff.
Wow. You know, often when I see the impact that Jews make in so many industries, and it's incredible. Not long ago I visited a survivor up in the Poconos Mountains. Unfortunately, he's passed away since then. And I went into his home, and it was full of these electrical devices. I was very confused as to what I was looking at. And he said to me, I asked him what he did, and he was an engineer. I said, okay. And eventually it turns out that he was the engineer and had written most of the patents for Cuisinart, for the kitchen devices. And I just thought to myself, like, how remarkable, and I say this often, but, God commanded the Jewish people to be a light amongst the nations. And we really have been.
We took it seriously.
Boy, did we take it seriously.
David had 21 patents when he worked for the company in Brooklyn. When he worked for the company in Brooklyn, they established a factory in Israel. And their sales office was supposed to be in Paris, which is why we moved to Paris. And so the company, he sold all over Western Europe. David spoke 7 or 8 languages. He went to Iran before the Shah was still in power,
right.
And he learned enough Farsi to be able to be polite. He went to Norway, to Sweden, to Denmark. He spoke many languages with a great deal of charm, and he was a very successful salesman.
How fascinating. And so, really, like, again, you look at this impact that we've had as a Jewish people, and it just falls back into how much we have to be proud of, right?
And you do it for survival as well. That is the bottom line.
So you think this success that we've had as Jews is as a result a lot of this need for survival, or more of...
I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I think one of the basics in life is survival, and everything else is the icing on the cake. So first you survive, and then you turn around and you say, what else can I do?
Right. Well, it's kind of the same thing that you saw with a lot of Holocaust survivors at the initial years of, for example, coming to the States. They weren't looking back. They weren't telling their stories.
No.
It was just a focus on moving forward and making sure they built this life. And only in their later years, when that had been settled, they could then turn around and say, okay, this is what I went through. But it's this constant pushing forward.
Good point. Absolutely.
Growing up with parents who experienced what they experienced, and the fear must have been unbelievable from their perspective, right? You still have these young kids, you're running away, you're escaping with virtually nothing. Like, how did that play itself out during your upbringing, if at all?
I think it depends on the people. I think of my parents as being extraordinarily brave and willing to face life directly in the face of. I think of my Aunt Jeanette, Dad's sister, who was always careful, and she was my favorite aunt. But whenever I visited her, she lived about 20 minutes. She'd be careful out there. Totally different. My father would say, life is for the living. He didn't know the words carpe diem, but life is for the living. And Aunt Jeanette would say, be careful out there. Totally different perspective.
Right. Everybody took it differently. But in terms of your upbringing, did you experience any of the kind of trauma through there?
Not really. Not really. The only perhaps correlation I can make to that is when I told my father that we were moving back to France. He was not happy. First of all, I was Daddy's little girl.
Right.
My sister was Mommy's little girl, but I was Daddy's little girl. And he said, after all we went through, you're going to be a refugee again. I said, no, I'm moving back under very different circumstances. That being said, we were in France during the 1968 student revolution. And that was somewhat frightening, to say the least, because de Gaulle had parked his troops right across in the garden across the street from my apartment. And there were many, many incidents, not immediately in my area, but we were very much aware of a tightening of things that were going on. And David had been in England at this particular point and came back and said he had spoken to his boss, and his boss wants the entire family back in the United States because of business reasons, not because of what was going on in France. So we didn't have any information about this, but we knew it had to happen, and we could not make any phone calls. So we took the last car with gas and drove to Belgium, and said, if the situation doesn't calm down in Paris, I will leave from Belgium with my children, and David will pack up the apartment. And I said to myself, Daddy, I'm a refugee again. And it was a very discomforting feeling, to say the least.
I can only but imagine. And so you're now here in America. Do you feel safe?
Yes. I feel very comfortable where I am. I have no problem. I don't wear a Star of David because I don't wear jewelry.
Right.
But I have absolutely no problems with my Jewish identification and my place in my community. I'm comfortable with that.
That's a great thing to hear, right? Like that's a very, very powerful and important thing to hear. So, we're coming to the end of this time that we have together here today. Now, is there a particular message that you think should be imparted to so many people who will listen to this? And is there something that one thing that you'd like people to know?
Stand up for who you are and what you want your world to be like. Don't be afraid. There was a president, and I have mixed emotions about this president, who said the greatest thing to fear you have to fear is fear itself.
Right.
And I feel that inhibits progress.
Fear.
Absolutely. Stand up for who you are.
What about when you are scared, though?
I'm sorry.
What about when you are fearful? How do you get through that?
Grit your teeth.
Grit your teeth. Put your socks up and get on with it.
Yep.
That's the tough approach.
And a practical approach.
Right.
In everyday life. I am a fearful driver. I came to driving in my 30s. One should learn when you're 16.
Yep.
So I don't drive long distance. I'm uncomfortable driving where I've never been. But if I have to do it, I do.
You grit your teeth and drive.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And honestly, I think that is going to be such an important message for so many because, truly we need that today. We need that strength and we need that understanding of how much we do need to stand tall and proud and not back down and not allow ourselves to be pushed around and be really proud of who we are because we're pretty amazing.
Yes. And it's a question of self-respect. I could not live with myself if I backed down and say, oh, I can't do that. I wouldn't. I have trouble sleeping because I'm of an age where that is an issue, but I don't want to have trouble sleeping because I didn't do what I thought was right.
Well, that's a strong moral compass, hey? That's kept you going through your whole life.
Yeah, I guess.
So be proud.
Absolutely.
Is the most important thing that we need to do.
Be proud and do things that make yourself be proud. So therein lies a very large spectrum.
Well, no, that's also a lot more difficult, right? Right. One needs to be proud of their actions, right?
Yes.
So it's also
and choices.
Choices, and that's behavior and what we decide to do and how we decide to live our lives. And
exactly.
There's so much within that. And what about from a religious perspective? How do you feel about that? Is there anything like...
I'm not very religious, but I'm going through a point in life. There is a temple in my town. There are very few Jews. So I'm on a steering committee to revitalize participation in the temple. Now, I look at myself as a holiday Jew. I really am not
right.
participant at this point. But do I want my temple to maintain itself? Absolutely. Am I planning activities to bring togetherness and to revive what we used to do? That was my meeting Tuesday night, and that's what I'm doing next week. I run a film series here at the museum in honor of my husband. Every other film, one film will deal with the Holocaust experience. The other film deals with targeted populations in the United States. I'm starting a film series for the temple.
Fantastic.
And I have a few other ideas for them.
So you see a correlation between Holocaust education and targeted communities here in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. How can one not see it?
I understand that.
We are all unfortunately capable, not capable, that's the wrong word. We all could be victims if given certain circumstances.
Absolutely. Hate is hate. So this is actually a pretty difficult question. how do you reconcile, again, look, as a Jewish community, we've been pretty good at this in terms of standing up for other communities. And we have a lot to be proud of. If it wasn't for civil rights here in America and so much that we stood up for. Yes. And even in a place like this, right? An incredible Holocaust center where we're showing one movie about the Holocaust and other about suffering of other peoples. How do you then feel about the fact that people don't really reciprocate towards us?
Keep trying. Do it by example. Keep trying. Voices will be heard. I think of my personal life as a kind of example, not exactly a paragon of virtue, but I try my best. And I think that that's what we all have to do. Keep trying. I think the Jewish motto, and I hate to put it under that kind of expression, we live in hope. And I've heard this in other languages and other cultures, but I think of it as particularly critical to who we are as Jews. We live in hope.
Right. And there's also this idea of modeling positive and good behavior.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, people grab onto that more than anything else. Their one experience with a Jew will be an experience. They'll say, hey, I saw that good behavior. I saw this. I felt a positiveness. So again, I understand that perspective. It's a very difficult perspective to have, right? Because especially now, I mean, and a lot of people would have, especially after October 7th and this humongous rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing all around the States, suddenly feel a little bit lonely without this community standing next to us. But keep trying.
That's exactly it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've
asked some very provocative, very thoughtful questions.
And I tell you something, it's easy when I'm sitting with somebody who's so smart and has such an insight and so many answers. And really, I think that I'm just a messenger and just the intermediary to enable your incredible story to be told.
I'm very grateful for having had the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.